What is the number one question that everybody asks at our stand at the shows that we exhibit at? And we're asked this question probably 20, 30 times each on any given day. So at least 50 times, maybe even close up to 100 times a day for every day of the show that we have a stand at. So let's have a look at that question. Hi folks, I'm Roger from Offgrid, and in this episode we are going to ask ourselves the question that we are asked many times on all the different shows. What do I need to replace in my system if I take out a lead acid battery or 2 or 3 lead acid batteries and replace them with a single lithium battery? That is the question we are asked time and time again at the shows, and we decided we would connect up a lithium battery. So this is one of our Ops 280s connected directly to our battery on my Toyota Hilux. So excuse the dirty engine, we've been going through some puddles. We've decided to hook it up to the Hilux just because we can get to these really easily. This is a 2007 model, and this is often the area that people are considering. So a van between the year 2000 and 2010 seems to be the most common age that people are considering taking out the lead acid and putting lithium in. So this will give us a good indication. So we've connected, as you can see, nice heavy cable, 50mm cable here. We're running from the positive to a fuse. So this is a 200 amp fuse just for safety. We have our clamp, it's zeroed. Nothing passing through, and the battery is currently turned off. So the first thing we are going to do, we're going to get onto the app. Obviously it's not listed here, so let's hope there are no sparks. We are going to turn the battery on. So battery goes on. So the batteries just come online. As you can see, we have some current flow, and I'm going to check to see. The BMS is reporting that we have about 2 amps coming out of the battery. So straight away the lithium battery is charging that one, and I'll expect the voltages to be identical on both, but let's just check. So this says we're at 13.13. This will say the same because we have connected it to our lithium battery. But before I turned this on, I measured the voltage here, and this was 12.65. So pretty much a very average resting voltage for a lead acid battery. So as you can see, our lithium, which is at 30% state of charge, is currently charging the lead acid at the moment at 1.1 amp. So it started off at about 6 amp, and it's gone down. It's going down steadily as it brings up the voltage of the starter battery. But what we'll do now, we'll go and we'll start this up and check to see how much current is actually flowing in here, and what happens when you connect this to 80 amp hour battery straight to your alternator. So let's go and start up and see what happens. So as you can see, the amps are starting to creep up. We're charging this thing at 6 amps at the moment. I'm going to go and rev the engine a little bit now and see what that does. But according to the clamp meter, we're at 6.2 amps, and according to the app, we're at about 6 amps. So let's go and rev this nicely so we can get as much juice flowing through as possible. Straight away you see we go to 42 amps, 50 amps. So the alternator is working well at 40. It's currently setting at about 44 amps. Went up to 50 amps briefly, coming back down again. Seems to have settled on 40 amps-ish. Something has gone off, so let's go and check the battery. Battery's still on. Don't know why it disconnected from the app. It's gone down to 26 amps now. .26 amps there, 27 amps recorded on there. So that's with this vehicle just idling. It's gone up to 37 amps now. So it's jumping about a little bit. 37 amps. I'm going to go rev it again. So still 37, 38 amps. Gone up to 40 amps. 41 amps. .42 amps. I'm revving quite hard now, and as you can hear, there's a lot going on with the engine there. 42 amps. Let's let it bring it back down to idle, so it's going to drop. I suspect it'll drop quite quickly down to 36 amps, 35, 34, and again once more I'll rev it up again. Going up to close on 40 amps now. Sitting on just over 40 amps. Let's leave it to idle for a bit. We'll let it idle for about 5 or minutes or so and see what happens with it. Just double checking all the connections. These are very thick cables, but what we wanted to do is to not have voltage drop on the cables, so that's why we put such thick cables on, knowing that they're not restricting the current flow at all. So the clamp meter is showing 31 amps and the app is showing just under 31, so that's about it. So at the moment this battery is pulling in just about the maximum that a Victron DC to DC would cope with, which is 30 amps. It puts in 30 amps, and but when the engine is revving it goes up to 40 amps, which is a bit more than the Victron DC DC allows. So this arrangement is quite unusual, and we just wanted to show exactly what would happen if the lithium battery is connected to your lead acid, therefore your alternator, directly with a fairly thick cable. What would actually happen? In reality, you would never do this. You would have your leisure battery somewhere in your vehicle or your boat or whatever it is, and you would have some sort of split charge system or a DC to DC charger, otherwise known as a battery to battery or a B2B charger, to start the charging process when you know that the engine is running. So this is just telling us now that with a direct connection like this to a 280 amp hour battery, the total amount of flow through this is 50 amps. It went to 50 amp briefly, but then settled down on 40 amps. So I guess for this battery, to ask and answer the question, what do I need to do if I drop a lithium battery in place of the lead acid? As you can see, when the engine was revving, the amperage flowing through into this was about 40 amps, and would that be enough to blow your onboard circuitry? I don't know. You'd need to look at your own van and see how much it could cope with. But that does indicate that the amount of current flow for this battery would be relatively high. Not that high. To be honest, this is a 200 amp hour a 280 amp hour battery with a 200 amp BMS. So it can take a charge of 200 amp or a discharge of 200 amps. So it can take a huge amount of flow to charge it, obviously at 200 amps, but it is only it drew 50 for a while and then dropped down to 40. So that gives the answer on this particular battery. In this second part of the same video, we have disconnected the 280 amp hour, the OPS 280 battery, and we've connected an OPS 100, which is a 100 amp hour, much smaller cells, and we would expect this to have a much lower current draw. So it's turned off at the moment. Let's get our clamp meter back on again. And it should be zeroed out, so make sure it's zeroed, so nothing flowing there. And again, I'm going to turn it on and scan for this one. It's 195. So we have about 8 amps draining from here into the starter battery, which is to be expected. So let's start up the engine again, and that should be completely reversed. Let's give it a bash. So at the moment, not much current flow. I haven't started revving the engine. I just wanted to see what this would say before I start revving the engine. 3 amps going there, 2.8 going in. So 2.8 amps flowing into the battery. Let's rev this engine and see what happens. So we've gone up to 7.8 volts, which is about 8 volts, 8.5, 9 volts. Seems to have settled on just below 10 volts, which is pretty much what we expected. 9.1. And now it's shut up. 195. It's actually gone offline. 195. Gone to 34 amps now. Let's let the engine idle for a little bit. Check the clamp meter. 26 amps flowing in here. (26 amps at idling). Let's go and rev the engine a little bit and see what happens there. Seems to have settled on 25 amps. (28 amps, 29 amps. About 32 amps is what it goes to maximum. Right, so we've stopped the engine. it's now flowing back from the lithium, the OPS 100, back into the starter, about 2.4 amps, 2.6 amps. Okay, we decided that connecting these batteries to only one alternator, as in my Hilux 2007 model, wouldn't be enough of a test. So we have connected now the OPS 100 amp hour battery directly to my motorhome battery there. Connected this to the chassis, the negative to the chassis, the positive straight to the battery there. And so let's turn this on. Here are the beeps. So it's just come on. So I'll find the battery here quickly. OPS 100, 195. Right, it is interestingly it's flowing into the battery at the moment from the starter engine into the lithium battery, 2.8 amps, but that would settle down. So let's start up and see what happens. I can see it peaked up to 37 amps and is settling back down now to 34. If I come around here to the noise and have a look, this is saying 33 amps going into the actual battery, 33.5 coming on the app. Let me go and rev it a little bit and just see what it goes to. Revving the engine a reasonable amount, still setting at about 32, 31.7, 32, 31.9, 32, 32.4. So it never really goes up to 33, so it's between 30 and 33. It's hit 33 now. So there we have 33. It's creeping up slowly, 33.2, 33.4, 33.5. Probably as it's charging the starter battery, and the starter battery is taking less and less, it's putting a little bit more into the leisure battery, into the lithium battery. 34.4. I'm going to leave this running for a short while. Wow, these exhaust fumes are hitting me. Let's let it idle for a bit. Sitting at 34.8, 35, 34.8. Coming down a little bit, 34.7. $34.5. Right, I think that's enough to know what's going on. So on this OPS 100, we have gone up to 35 amps on this alternator. Went to 33 amps in the Hilux, 35 amps on this one. So it does go to show that there's a little bit of difference, not much, a little bit of difference between the different alternators. So what we're going to do now, we are going to turn this off, hold the button down, wait for the beep. That's off. I'm going to now take this off, take these leads off, and connect the OPS 280 on, the much bigger battery. Right, so we've connected the OPS 280, the much bigger battery. In between Some fuses blew. Old fuse that I've had since the very beginning, this fuse blew. So we have connected it slightly differently. Didn't know that the charge system went through this fuse in a different way. Right, so we have that connected at 13.25. Let's start up the engine. .66 amps, 70, 71, 72 amps, 61 amps. So reasonable amount of draw. It actually flicked the other way during the starting, quite a high spike, but that's to be expected. It's dropping right down now to 14, 12. I'm going to rev it a bit again and see what it goes up to. Straight up to 35, 40, 39, around about 39, 37, 36, 37. It's dropping slowly. Down to 36. Doesn't actually make much sense, to be honest. Let me turn it off. Now it's idling, it's dropped down to 9. Interesting. Right, in conclusion, we've run the test on 2 different batteries, a 100 amp, a 280 amp. We ran it on my Hilux 2007 model. We've just run this off the Fiat Ducato motorhome. This is an old one, it's a 94 Reg with a new alternator that we upgraded to. I think it's a 160 amp alternator that we upgraded to. We've blown a few fuses that we've replaced, but the smaller battery sort of peaked at 40 and came down quite quickly. So you need to take into account the fact that this would draw up to 40 amps even if it's for a fairly short period of time, and you'd need to fuse it appropriately. This one peaked up to about 70 just for a short while, and then came down, and for the most part it was knocking on about 40 or just under 40. So around about 30 amps, around about 40 amps. So we knew that the bigger battery would draw a little bit more, and similar results to the Hilux. So basically, if you are wanting to do a drop-in replacement, you need to bear it in mind a few things. Firstly, you can't control the amps flowing through with this kind of connection. So if you have a very sensitive electroblock that can't take the current, potentially the bigger lithium batteries might blow the system. As I said, peaked to 70 amps for a short while, came down to 40, and if your system can't take consistently 40 amps flowing through it, you might find that you blow the electroblock.
Look at these two disrupting the video.
Yeah.
Fudge.
You're meant to be directing, dogs.
Enough.
Right. That's in terms of just protecting everything. This one is going to be more forgiving because as I said, it peaked to 40, which most electroblocks would cope with, if not all modern vans would cope with that, and then came down to about 30 amps, which is, I guess, is acceptable for most motorhomes. If you're unlucky, you might still blow something. So, but the other side of it is that you want to actually get the most of the batteries. If you're going to make this investment, you're going to want to get the absolute maximum out of your batteries. And that's one of the reasons why you would install a DC to DC, simply because then you are charging these to their 100% state of charge to their full capacity and getting the most out of them. You're charging at the right voltage, you're charging at the right amperage to protect the battery. It's not so much the battery, I'll get to that another point that I want to make shortly, but you want to protect the battery, you want to protect all the EBL, the electrics of the motorhome, and finally you want to protect the alternator so that you're not overloading the system. And a proper DC to DC, especially for a battery like this, will ensure that you are protecting everything. One of the arguments made by some folk who would state that their lithiums are drop-in replacements. One of the arguments against that is that they'll say that the BMS will protect the battery. And it is good practice in the industry to not rely on only one thing to protect the battery. So with a lot of the experts on forums, etc., they would say that the battery management system inside here, the BMS inside here, should not be your last line of defense. Your charging system should be configured to provide the correct voltage, and that is your first line of defense, and then the BMS becomes your second line of defense. But you shouldn't have this as being your first and your last line of defense. When you connect your lithium leisure battery directly to the starter battery or the alternator through a split charge system or through your EBL or whatever, basically the BMS becomes the first and last line of defense to protect the battery. And that's one of the reasons why we recommend installing a DC to DC or a battery to battery charger in order that you have multiple lines of defense to protect the battery. It's not as much of an issue on the OPS 100 or the 100 amp hour battery. No matter what make you have, they're all fairly similar. These have EVE cells with a JK BMS. A lot of our opposition also have EVE cells, but with a JBD or maybe a JK. Some have a DALI inside them. All very similar. So the 100 amp hour, it should be okay in most cases, but if you're really unlucky, 1 out of 100 or whatever, it might not be okay. The bigger batteries, I would definitely not treat them as a drop-in replacement. If it was my motorhome and there was going to be if something blew on the electroblock, that there was going to be a sort of a $5,000 cost of replacing that. As you know, when you need to replace those sort of things in the motorhome, they cost an arm and a leg. And so I would rather be cautious and get the right stuff to charge this. So that's it. That's answered the question, do I need to do anything to my electrics? You can get away with it with a smaller battery, probably, and in most cases okay. But with the bigger batteries, I would not treat these as a drop-in replacement.